She called security before I finished my sentence. Not after I said something wrong. Not after I raised my voice. She looked up from the head of that long glass table, looked at me the way you look at something that wandered into the wrong room, and pressed the call button on her phone without taking her eyes off her laptop screen. 2 guards arrived in under 40 seconds. I was standing there in my gray coveralls with the Harmon Building Services patch on the left breast, holding a folded sheet of paper I had been trying to hand to someone for the better part of 3 days. Neither guard asked me a single question. They flanked me, took me by the elbows with the practiced efficiency of men who have done this before and found it unremarkable, and walked me out through the glass doors, down the corridor, and through the service exit at the back of the building. The last thing I heard before the door closed was her voice, flat and clear from the boardroom. "Get the ventilation people back. I don't want that smell in here again." My daughter Maya was waiting in the maintenance bay on the ground floor. She was 9 years old, sitting on an upturned plastic crate, doing her spelling homework with a pencil she had sharpened down to about 3 inches. She looked up when she heard my boots on the concrete. "Did they listen?" she asked. I sat down next to her on a second crate and looked at the folded paper still in my hand. "Not yet," I said. She nodded slowly, with the gravity of a child who has learned not to be surprised by that answer, but still asks the question every time. She went back to her spelling. I folded the paper again and put it in my breast pocket. Her name was Serena Voss, 44 years old, CEO of Voss Capital Group, a private equity firm that had acquired Harmon Tower 6 weeks ago. Almost immediately after the acquisition, the old facilities crew had been replaced by Voss Capital's preferred vendor. I had been kept on because I'd worked that building for 4 years, and because the new supervisor, a man named Gerald Hatch, had looked at my record and decided it was easier to keep me than train someone new. I was not complaining about any of that. What I had been trying to tell Serena Voss's office for 72 hours was that the HVAC retrofit her company had approved 2 weeks ago had been installed with a sequencing error in the control logic. A specific kind of error I had seen once before, 11 years ago, in a different building in a different country, under circumstances I was not going to explain in a maintenance bay. The error was not cosmetic. In certain load conditions, certain ambient temperature windows, it would create a pressure differential in the return air shafts that would cause the fire suppression sensors on floors 12 through 17 to register false positives. And a false positive in this system, with the specific suppression agent this building used, meant a full discharge. Not a gentle alert. A discharge. In a building with 1,100 people in it on any given weekday. I had tried Gerald Hatch first on Monday. He listened for 90 seconds and told me he'd look into it. I had tried the building engineer on Tuesday. Roy Castle was 61 years old and had managed his entire career by never telling anyone above him that something was wrong without 3 people corroborating him and a 30-day paper trail. He looked at my folded paper, looked at me, and said, "That's not your area, son." On Wednesday, I went to the management office on the 32nd floor and asked to speak to whoever was responsible for the retrofit decision. The receptionist accepted my written note with the expression of someone accepting something they intend to throw away. By Thursday morning, no one had called. So I had taken Maya to work with me because it was a school holiday and there was no one else. And I had carried the folded paper up to the 35th floor in my coveralls and walked into the boardroom and said, "I need 2 minutes." That was when Serena Voss pressed the button. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Maya and I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Garland district, 12 minutes from Harmon Tower by bike. The kitchen window got good morning light. The radiator in the hall knocked on cold nights. Maya had arranged a fire escape outside her room with a folded blanket and a flashlight and decided it was a reading platform. I had told her 3 times it was not structurally designed for recreational use. She had listened each time with great seriousness and continued using it. I cooked every night. The hour between 5:30 and 6:30, the cutting and the heat and the plates set out on the table, was the part of the day where I was most completely in one place. Maya did homework at the kitchen table while I cooked, sometimes reading questions aloud to me, sometimes working in silence. We ate together every night I was home. I was home almost every night. Maya's mother, Diane, had left when Maya was 4. She wasn't a bad person. She was a person who had married someone she thought she understood and had gradually discovered the version of me she'd married was only the visible layer. She said this to me once, quietly, without cruelty. I had sat with it for a long time because I thought she was right. She called on Maya's birthdays and flew out twice a year from Portland, where she had built a life that fit her better. Maya loved her mother with the clear, unguarded love of a child who had not yet been given a reason to complicate it. I was glad for that. What Diane had not fully known, what I had not fully told her. I had spent 8 years in a unit that did not appear on any public-facing document. The first 3 in the Army in signals. The following 5 attached to a joint counterterrorism task force, working in the specific overlap between signals and analysis that had no clean title, but that the people who needed it called pattern work. Finding the signature of a threat inside the noise of ordinary data. Knowing what a system looked like when it was about to fail versus when it was already failing. The difference between those 2 things was time. Time was always the thing that mattered. I had been good at it. I left in 2009 under circumstances that were not entirely voluntary. There had been a situation. It had been resolved correctly, which made my continued presence inconvenient for several people above me. I received an honorable discharge, a handshake, and a 2-paragraph reference letter that said nothing specific. I spent a year doing very little. Then I took a job at a private intelligence firm in Alexandria. Then I met Diane. Then Maya. I left the firm in 2017. I had spent 2 years producing analysis used to justify decisions that had already been made, and I no longer had the stomach for it. I handed in my notice on a Tuesday and was out by Friday. The cleaning work paid enough. Less than the firm, considerably, but Maya's school was public and our needs were not complicated. I worked the early shift, 5 to 1, which meant I was home when she got back from school. That was the part that mattered. I had told no one at Harmon Tower anything about what I'd done before. Gerald Hatch knew there had been government work because my employment history said so in the vague way that experienced HR people recognize and do not push on. Beyond that, I was the quiet man with the gray coveralls and the thorough work record and the daughter who sometimes sat in the maintenance bay doing homework. That was enough. That was what I had wanted. The problem was not going to wait. The outdoor temperature had been sitting in the 61 to 65 degree window for 3 days and was forecast to stay there for 5 more. That was the exact trigger range I had calculated from the installation parameters, which I had read off Roy Castle's open desk in the 45 seconds it took him to walk down the hall to the coffee machine. The suppression agent in the system displaced oxygen. In occupied floors with sealed windows and a compromised ventilation sequence, a full discharge was not a minor event. I sat at the kitchen table after Maya was in bed and looked at the folded paper and thought about Serena Voss's face when she pressed that button. The particular quality of her not looking at me. The way she had already returned to her laptop before the guards were through the door. I had seen that kind of attention before. The kind produced by an architecture of authority that filters certain information out before it can arrive. I called Gerald Hatch. He didn't answer. I left a message that was specific and factual and calm, stating the failure parameters, the predicted trigger window, the floors at risk, and the suppression agent involved. Then I went to bed. Maya knocked on my door at 6:15 the next morning. Dad, yeah, there are 2 men outside. Suit men. One has a badge on his belt. I was dressed and at the front door in 90 seconds. 2 men on the landing. Dark suits. The older one had the build of someone whose vigilance had settled into his posture and stayed there. The younger one carried a messenger bag and the expression of someone taking careful mental notes. The older one held up a credential wallet. FBI, Cyber Division. Mr. Calder, he said. Yes. My name is Agent Ferris. We've been tracking a network intrusion into the Harmon Tower building management system. Someone accessed the HVAC control logic remotely 4 days ago and altered the sequencing parameters. It was made to look like a routine firmware update. He paused. We picked up your voice message to Gerald Hatch this morning. The failure parameters you described were accurate to a margin that requires either direct system access or very specific technical knowledge. Or someone who read the installation report and did the math, I said. The younger agent wrote something down. We're not treating you as a suspect, Ferris said. We're here because your assessment was correct, and because the people inside Voss Capital have not been forthcoming. We need someone who understands the system. Another pause, shorter. We also know your service record, Mr. Calder. The parts of it that aren't in the file. The kitchen was quiet. Down the hall, Maya turned a page. The obfuscation method used in this intrusion has been seen twice before, Ferris said. Both times in foreign infrastructure compromise cases attributed to a specific non-state actor group. You worked on the 2014 case. We know because of a clearance reference attached to that file. I looked at him for a long moment. What do you need? I said. Agent Ferris spread 3 photographs on my kitchen table, printed on plain paper, the kind you pull from a briefing folder in a hurry. The first showed a line of code, a screenshot of something embedded inside what looked like a standard firmware log. The second was a network diagram with 2 nodes circled in red marker. The third was a building schematic I recognized immediately as Harmon Tower, floors 10 through 18, with the HVAC return shafts marked in blue. I looked at all 3 without touching them. The insertion point is in the scheduler module, I said, not the sensor array. Whoever did this didn't want the sensors to malfunction. They wanted the suppression sequence to activate at the wrong time. Ferris watched me. Go on. The sensors will read correctly. Temperature, smoke, particulate. All accurate. But when the suppression threshold is crossed, the scheduler that governs the discharge sequence will fire a secondary command before the primary vents open. That secondary command closes the return air dampers. I tapped the schematic without picking it up. Floors 12 through 17 have no operable windows. With the dampers closed and the suppression agent discharged, the oxygen displacement is total in under 4 minutes. Chung had stopped writing. He was just looking at me. That's not a false positive scenario, Ferris said slowly. No, I said. It was never a false positive scenario. I was wrong about that part. I was working from the installation report, which only showed half the picture. This was designed to look like an accident. The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. 1,100 people, Ferris said. On a weekday. Yes. Maya appeared in the hallway doorway, backpack on, lunchbox in hand, ready for school even though there was no school. She had put herself together anyway, because that was the kind of child she was. She looked at the photographs on the table, looked at me, looked at the agents. I made my lunch, she said, in case you needed the kitchen. I stood up and walked her to the hall. I crouched down to her level and straightened the collar of her jacket, which did not need straightening. Mrs. Portillo downstairs, I said. Can you go sit with her for a little while? Maya looked at me with the particular assessment she reserved for moments when she was deciding whether to ask a question or simply trust me. She chose trust the way she usually did. Okay, she said. Don't forget, I have a spelling test next week. I know. You're supposed to quiz me tonight. I'll quiz you tonight. She held my face in both her hands for exactly 2 seconds, the way she had done since she was small, and had decided it was a satisfactory way to conclude a serious conversation. Then she picked up her lunchbox and went downstairs. I went back to the table. The group Ferris described had operated for approximately 6 years under a name that translated loosely from the Russian as the Remediation Collective, though they had never called themselves anything publicly because public identity was not their model. They were not ideological. They were contractual. They took assignments from clients who needed infrastructure disruption to look accidental, who needed the kind of event that produced chaos without attribution. A building fire here, a power grid fluctuation there, a chemical plant malfunction. Every one of them had looked, in the immediate aftermath, like the result of maintenance failure, equipment age, human error. They had come to the attention of my old task force in 2014 after a water treatment facility outside Gdansk had experienced what the local authorities classified as a software anomaly. 17 people had been hospitalized. The anomaly had been their work. I had spent 4 months building the technical profile of their insertion method, the way they hid the payload inside legitimate system updates, the specific architecture of the obfuscation layer. I had written a 60-page assessment that had been classified at a level that meant perhaps 30 people in the world had read it. The client in this case, Ferris said, setting down his coffee. We believe it's a competitor acquisition play. There's a secondary bidder for the Harmon Tower property. If Voss Capital sustains a catastrophic liability event at their flagship acquisition, the deal structure collapses. The tower goes back to market. The secondary bidder steps in. Who is the secondary bidder? Ferris glanced at Chung. A holding company called Arden Meridian, registered in Delaware, beneficial ownership obscured through 3 layers of shell structure. We're still pulling the thread. How much time do I have? The trigger window opens this afternoon. The outdoor temperature is forecast to hit 62 degrees at approximately 2 p.m. and hold through the evening. I looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. It was 7:43 in the morning. I need access to the building management system terminal, I said. Physical access, not remote. The obfuscation layer they use closes off remote remediation pathways as part of the insertion. You have to be at the terminal. The terminal is on the 14th floor, Ferris said, in the building management office. I know where it is. Voss Capital security director has been informed there's a federal investigation. He's cooperating. He'll give you access. Ferris paused. The problem is Serena Voss herself. She's aware of the investigation as of this morning, and she is not cooperating. She's told her legal team that no Harmon Building Services employee is to be given access to any secured system in the building. I looked at him. She thinks you're a suspect, Ferris said. He had the expression of a man who found this professionally inconvenient and personally absurd. The fact that you identified the failure parameters in her assessment implies you had prior knowledge. She doesn't know what prior knowledge looks like. No, he said. She doesn't. I sat back. Through the kitchen window, the morning light was coming in flat and gray. A pigeon landed on the fire escape railing outside and sat there for a moment and then left. Can you get a federal order? I asked. We're working on it. Judge Carver's clerk said mid-morning at the earliest. That gives us a window of maybe 3 hours before the trigger window opens. He paused. 3 hours if the forecast is accurate. Less if it's not. I thought about the 60-page assessment I had written in 2014. I thought about the specific paragraph on page 41, the one that described how this group's insertion method could be reversed manually from a physical terminal using a sequence of commands that I had documented precisely because I had understood even then that remote remediation would not always be an option. That paragraph had been written by a 31-year-old man in a task force office in Stuttgart at 2 in the morning, and it was the only copy of that information in existence outside of a classified archive. I thought about 1,100 people. I'm going to the building, I said. Ferris started to say something about the order. Get the order, I said. I'll be there when you have it, but I'm going to be in the building. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once. I put on my coveralls. I put the folded paper in my breast pocket out of habit more than purpose. I wrote a note for Maya and left it on the kitchen table next to a $20 bill and a box of the crackers she liked. The bike ride to Harmon Tower took 11 minutes. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The lobby of Harmon Tower at 8:15 on a Friday morning was the organized motion of a building settling into its day. Security badges scanning at the turnstiles. Elevator banks filling and emptying. The coffee cart near the south entrance doing steady business. I had cleaned this lobby 400 times. I knew the floor plan the way you know a place you have moved through in the dark. The security director was a man named Paul Vega, 50 years old, former municipal police, with the careful eyes of someone who had spent a career reading rooms. He met me at the service entrance with a temporary access badge and the expression of a man who had received a phone call that morning that had significantly reorganized his understanding of the day. 14th floor, he said. I'll take you up. I know the way. He looked at me. I know you do. I'm taking you up anyway. We rode the service elevator in silence. On the 14th floor, the building management office with a room most people in the tower had never seen. 2 rows of monitors, a central server rack, the physical terminal for the BMS system, sitting in the corner like an old piece of furniture no one had thought to replace. I had cleaned this room twice a week for 4 years. I had looked at that terminal twice a week for 4 years and said nothing about what I knew and what it meant. I sat down at it now. The login sequence took 40 seconds because the administrator credentials Vega provided were current, but the system prompt was running an older interface version and required a specific workaround I had identified 18 months ago and logged in a personal notebook at home. I had the workaround memorized. I was inside the system at 9:02. The payload was exactly where I expected it to be. Not in the sensor array, not in the alarm protocol, buried in the scheduler module, nested inside a legitimate maintenance subroutine that had been there since the system's original installation in 2009. The obfuscation layer was the same architecture I had documented in Stuttgart. Same structural logic, same entry signature, different target, same hand. I began the remediation sequence. It was not fast work. Fast work in this kind of system produced errors, and errors in a suppression control system were the thing you were trying to prevent in the first place. I worked methodically, moving through the command sequence the way I had written it on page 41, step by step, checking each output before proceeding to the next. Vega stood behind me and said nothing. He was good at reading when silence was what the room needed. At 9:47, the door opened. I heard her before I turned around. The particular quality of footsteps that belonged to someone who has never walked into a room they did not believe they owned. What is this? Serena Voss was standing in the doorway of the building management office in a charcoal blazer and the expression of a woman who had been told something that contradicted her existing conclusions and had come to correct the record personally. Behind her was a man in a suit I did not recognize and a woman I assumed was her legal counsel. "Mr. Vega," she said, not looking at me. I gave explicit instructions. "Ma'am," Vega said carefully, "there's a federal, I know what there is. I also know that this man was identified as a person of interest in the investigation, and I want him removed from this terminal immediately." I kept working. I did not turn around. "Stop what you're doing," she said, directed at me now, sharp and flat. "I need 4 more minutes," I said. "You need to step away from that terminal right now, or I will have you arrested." "You can have me arrested at 9:52, I said. Not before. The silence that followed had a specific texture. The kind that comes when a person in authority realizes their authority has encountered something it cannot move. "Who are you?" she said. Quieter now. Something underneath the sharpness had shifted. I did not answer. Not yet. I had 4 minutes of work left in a building full of people who did not know that the temperature outside was 59 degrees and climbing. I finished at 9:51, 1 minute early. The final command executed cleanly. The scheduler module returned to its original state, and the suppression sequence restored itself to the correct parameters. I ran the diagnostic twice. Both times the system came back green across all 17 floors. I sat back in the chair and looked at the screen for a moment, not in relief exactly, more in the way you look at something after you have confirmed it is what you needed it to be. Then I turned around. Serena Voss had not moved from the doorway. Her legal counsel had taken 2 steps into the room at some point during the last 4 minutes and was standing with her arms slightly away from her sides in the posture of someone who was preparing to say something official. The man in the suit beside Serena had his phone out, though he had not raised it. Paul Vega was still behind me. He had not said a word in 4 minutes. He was good at his job. Serena looked at the screen. Then she looked at me. She was a precise woman, the kind whose face rarely did anything unplanned, and for a moment her face was doing something she had not planned. "What did you do?" she said. "Removed a payload from your scheduler module. The obfuscation layer is clean. The suppression sequence will function correctly now." I stood up from the terminal. "The outdoor temperature is currently 61 degrees. Your trigger window opened approximately 9 minutes ago." She stared at me. "If I had stepped away from that terminal when you asked me to," I said, "the first false threshold crossing would have occurred sometime between 2 and 4 this afternoon. The discharge on floors 12 through 17 would have taken approximately 4 minutes to reach full displacement. You have 840 workstations on those floors. On a Friday afternoon, occupancy runs around 70%. Her legal counsel said, "Ms. Voss." Serena held up one hand without looking at her. Agent Ferris came through the door at 9:54 with a second agent I had not seen before in a document that he held at his side with the air of a man who had sprinted for a taxi and arrived to find the meeting already over. He looked at the terminal screen. He looked at me. He let out a breath through his nose that was not quite a sigh. "It's done," I said. He looked at the screen for another moment. Then he turned to Serena Voss with a federal document and began explaining to her legal counsel what it authorized. I was no longer the most interesting thing in the room for either of them. I picked up the folded paper from where I had set it on the edge of the desk. I put it in my breast pocket. I walked to the door. "Wait." Her voice, quieter than I had heard it before. Not the flat executive register she had used in the boardroom. Not the sharp command she had used 4 minutes ago. Something underneath both of those. I stopped. "Your name?" she said. "I don't know your name." "Calder," I said. "I cleaned the floors on 22 through 28. I left. I biked home. Mrs. Portillo had fed Maya breakfast and taught her 2 card games, and Maya was winning the second one when I came through the door. She looked up at me with the assessment she had been running since she was 4 years old, the one that checked whether I had come back whole. "Done?" she said. "Done," I said. She went back to her cards. I made lunch. I quizzed her on spelling at the kitchen table in the afternoon. At 6:30, I made pasta with the sauce she liked, the one with the small amount of cream that she pretended not to notice because she had once declared she didn't like cream in pasta and had been too committed to the position to reverse it. We ate together. She told me about the card games. I listened to every word. After she was in bed, I sat at the kitchen table for a while in the quiet of the apartment, the radiator knocking in the hall, the city doing its ordinary business outside the window. I thought about the 60-page assessment. I thought about the fact that somewhere in a classified archive, a document existed that described exactly what I had done this morning and that no one who read it would ever connect it to the man who cleaned floors 22 through 28. I thought that was probably fine. The call came the following Monday. Not from Ferris. From a number I did not recognize. With a country code I recognized immediately. I answered it on the second ring. The man on the other end spoke in English with the careful precision of someone who had learned it as a third language and had decided to master it. He identified himself as Deputy Director Halloran of Interpol's Cybercrime Directorate, line office. He said my name correctly, which meant he had been briefed by someone who knew me. He said that the payload removed from the Harmon Tower system had provided sufficient forensic material to complete the attribution case against the remediation collective that his directorate had been building for 3 years. He said that the specific obfuscation architecture, now fully documented from a live insertion, matched 17 other infrastructure incidents across 9 countries. He said that the 60-page assessment I had written in 2014 had been on his directorate's desk since 2015, and that without it, the attribution case would have taken another 2 years. He said he would like me to come to Lyon. I told him I would think about it. I sat with that call for 2 days. On Tuesday evening, I was cleaning the executive corridor on the 35th floor, running the buffer along the baseboard near the conference room, when the door opened and Serena Voss walked out. She stopped when she saw me. I kept the buffer running for 2 more seconds, then switched it off. She looked different from the 2 times I had seen her before. The first time she had not looked at me at all. The second time she had looked at me with the expression of someone assembling a case against me in real time. Now she looked at me the way you look at someone when you're trying to reconcile 2 separate images of them that your mind has not yet managed to merge. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I waited. I had you removed from a boardroom when you were trying to tell me something that mattered. I did it because of what you looked like and where you worked, and because I had already decided, before you opened your mouth, that you didn't have anything worth hearing." She said all of this without flinching, which I respected. That was wrong. I'm telling you directly because I think anything less than that would be insufficient. "All right," I said. She waited, as if she expected more. "Apology accepted," I said. Something moved through her face. Relief, maybe, or something adjacent to it. Then she said, "Agent Ferris told me some of what you did. Not the details. He said there were details he couldn't share, but enough. He told you more than he needed to. He told me what he thought I should understand." She looked at the buffer machine, then back at me. "Why are you still cleaning floors?" It was a genuine question, not a condescending one. The condescension had been in the boardroom. This was something else. Because it's a good job, I said. I'm home by 1. My daughter is 9 years old. She has a spelling test next week and a reading platform on the fire escape and a very strong opinion about pasta sauce. I picked up the buffer handle. That's the life I built. I built it on purpose. She was quiet for a moment. I built mine on purpose too, she said. I'm not sure I built it well. I looked at her. There was no performance in it. It was the kind of thing a person says when they have been standing in a room where 1,100 people almost died because of a decision they made, and the person who prevented it was someone they had thrown out of their building the day before. You can rebuild it, I said. People do. She nodded slowly. Then she said, if you ever want a different job, I'd like to offer you one. Not as a gesture, because I've had 3 security directors in 4 years, and none of them would have done what you did last Friday. I thought about lying. I thought about Maya's spelling test. I thought about the way the morning light came through the kitchen window. I'll think about it, I said. She almost smiled. You say that a lot. I mean it every time, I said. She went back through the conference room door. I switched the buffer back on and finished the corridor. I called Ferris that night. I told him to tell Halloran that I would come to Lyon for 1 week as a consultant, not a contractor, and that I would need to arrange care for my daughter before I confirmed dates. Ferris said he would pass it along. He also said, before he hung up, that the secondary bidder behind Ardent Meridian had been identified. A man named Curtis Weld, former commercial real estate developer, with documented connections to 2 of the 9 infrastructure incidents attributed to the collective. He was in custody in Brussels as of that morning. I sat with that for a moment. Anyone else in the building? I asked. Anyone inside Voss Capital who was part of it? We're still working through the picture, Ferris said. But Gerald Hatch received a wire transfer of $42,000 6 weeks ago from Shell account we've now connected to Weld structure. Gerald Hatch, who had listened to me for 90 seconds on Monday and told me he'd look into it. Okay, I said. You all right? Yes, I said. And I was. Not because it was tidy, it wasn't. It was the kind of resolution that left threads and questions and the particular knowledge that the world contains people willing to arrange the deaths of 1,100 strangers for a property acquisition. I had known that for a long time. Knowing it again was not a surprise. It was just the weight of it, which did not get lighter with familiarity. Maya was asleep. I checked on her before I went to bed. She was on her side with one arm tucked under the pillow, her breathing even and slow, the flashlight she used on the fire escape sitting on a nightstand next to a library book and a drawing she had made of the 2 of us standing in front of our building. She had drawn me taller than I was, which was something children did, and she had drawn herself with what appeared to be a cape, which was something Maya did. I stood in her doorway for a moment. Then I went to bed and slept without difficulty, the way I had learned to sleep after years of work that required the ability to be fully present 1 minute and fully rested the next. It was one of the few things that career had given me that I had kept without ambivalence. 3 weeks later, I was in Lyon for 6 days. I sat across a long table from 7 Interpol analysts and walked them through the 60-page assessment section by section, answering questions, clarifying the technical architecture, updating the 2 sections that were now outdated because the collective had evolved their method in the decades since I wrote it. The analysts were good. 2 of them were exceptional. I told them so, which was not something I said without meaning it. On the 4th day, Halloran asked if I would consider a formal consulting arrangement, a retained advisory role, 1 week per quarter, travel covered, a fee that was more than I made in 6 months at Harmon Tower. I told him I would need to think about the school calendar. He laughed. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that comes from being surprised by an answer you did not expect from someone with a file as long as mine. I'll give you 2 weeks, he said. I came home on a Thursday. Maya was at school. I went to the apartment, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table in the morning light. The radiator was quiet. The city outside was doing its ordinary business. I thought about what Serena Voss had said, about building a life on purpose and not being sure she had built it well. I had built mine carefully, piece by piece, with the specific intention of making it small enough that it fit the 2 of us without excess. The early mornings and the school pickups and the kitchen table and the pasta sauce with the cream, she pretended not to notice. I had built it after years of work in rooms that most people never knew existed. And I had built it because Maya was 9 years old and she had a reading platform on the fire escape and a very particular way of holding my face in both her hands at the end of a serious conversation, and none of that could wait. Halloran's offer was still on the table. Serena's offer was still on the table. I was in no hurry to clear either one. When Maya came home from school that afternoon, she dropped her backpack by the door and came into the kitchen and sat down at the table in the particular way that meant she had something to tell me. "I got 100 on my spelling test," she said. I looked up from the stove. "Every word," she said. "Every word," I said. She nodded with the dignity of someone who had known this was coming and had chosen not to mention it until the evidence was in hand. She unzipped her backpack and put the test on the table, face up, the red 100 circled at the top in her teacher's handwriting. I looked at it for a moment. Then I looked at her. "Dad," she said, "are you going to cry about a spelling test?" "No," I said. She studied my face with the assessment she had been running since she was 4 years old. "You look like you might." "I'm not," I said. She accepted this. She pulled the test back across the table and looked at it herself. And for a moment, she had the same expression I had seen on her face in the maintenance bay, the gravity of a child who has understood that some things matter more than they appear to, and that the correct response to that understanding is not to announce it, but simply to carry it forward. "What's for dinner?" she said. "Pasta," I said. "With the sauce." "With the sauce." She put the spelling test back in her backpack, zipped it up, and went down the hall to the fire escape with her flashlight and her library book. I turned back to the stove. The radiator knocked once in the hall and then went quiet. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary evening, indifferent and constant, the way cities are, the way they have always been. And in a fourth-floor apartment on a street it had never thought twice about, a man stood at a stove and made dinner for his daughter, and the day settled around them both like something earned. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.